Hello, this is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups Podcast. My guest today is Mike McRitchie. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be on. Appreciate it.
So give me a kind of a short personal bio. Who is Mike McRitchie?
Yeah, so I've been in the telecom business the last 20 plus years, and am responsible for essentially building cell towers and making our smartphones work. And that's evolved a lot over the last 20 years from, just being this big brick phone to everything in your head is now on your phone and you can't live without it.
And a lot of stuff that's not in my head.
Exactly. Without it, I feel lost. So
Exactly.
That's kind of the core. And through that, I've worked for a bunch of businesses, been an employee, been a contractor, hired, fired, been hired and fired. And through all that, I really enjoyed the business aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted to get to where I could start giving some of that back to people, because I realized, hey, I'm not getting any younger. And if I don't share it, it's just going to die with me. So I figured, why not do something with it? And so I started getting into kind of small business consulting, and just found that most of my friends and connections that I found on LinkedIn were all employees. So I said, why don't I just do a resume writing business? Because that's something I can at least test, get started on, and then apply some of that to my business consulting efforts as well, since I'd have actual test cases and stories around that. So that's kind of how I got going, and have a couple of kids, a 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they get to listen over my shoulder as I kind of do some of this stuff and learn from it. So they're kind of coming along for the ride as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like a passive mentoring you can do as a parent mentoring. You can
Exactly. So they asked me, how much money did you make today, or what are you doing with this blog post or this podcast or whatever. So they get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and I get to share some elements of it with I help them with some of their things that they're working on, and try and get that bug in their ears so that they see the benefit of business and how to do something beyond just hop into a job and go.
You're probably one of the few parents that can actually help their kids with their cell phones.
Yeah, although they start to help me with them too, which is kind of scary.
Hey, Dad, you know you could do this? Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, be quiet, go back to your room.
What is that noise? Yeah. Exactly. So give me a kind of you touched on a little bit, but give me kind of the elevator pitch. This is my business. Is it a side business? Is it your main business? Or kind of clarify that for us.
Right. So it's a side business. I do it anywhere from 10 to 15 hours a week. It is primarily right now doing resumes and LinkedIn profiles for people,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of career coaching along with it. Probably my core element is people in telecom, because I have a lot of experience there, and I have some recruiters that I coach on their businesses. So we get some referral relationships through that. People who they have great people to place at certain roles, but they don't have good resumes. So they'll send them my way to fix the resume so that they can get them placed. So it's kind of a neat little relationship there. And then I had a blog that I started about 3 years ago and built that up. And that, plus some of the other guest posts that I've had on my website, kind of just provide a little bit of organic traffic.
Right.
And it's kind of funny this year. I felt like we were getting to the point where I was getting more business than I could handle part-time. And so that was a little scary. But overall, it's been fun, and it really is a learning journey. Mm-hmm. And as long as you don't put pressure on yourself to perform anything by a certain date, but just kind of learn and explore and see where things go, you can really have a lot of fun with it and turn it into something where you look back 2-3 years and you go, wow, it's really progressed.
Exactly. So the elevator started at floor number 3 and went to floor number 1. You had 22 seconds, and you told me your main it's resume building and primarily through LinkedIn profiles.
Yeah, basically doing those two things. So okay. I take their resumes, rewrite them, and then often I'll go to their LinkedIn profiles and rewrite that as well. So it kind of is consistent across their personal brand.
Okay. Let me, as a resume expert, let me ask you this question. So have you seen the unique resume style that has kind of floated around the internet that was done by the Yahoo CEO? Is it Marissa Mayer? Have you seen, It's almost like a like an infographic resume.
Yeah.
It has like a pie chart on it of, this is my typical day or something. Have you
Yeah.
started using anything like that? I mean, have you toyed with that a little bit, or?
Yeah, I haven't really. I've seen a few of those pop over.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that I kind of focus more on is I realize that there's kind of that look of the year or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And some of the infographics, on my website, it seems like now everybody wants to share an infographic with a unique intro.
Right.
And so it's kind of a similar deal. But for me, I really focus a lot harder on really what's not in the resume yet, because what I find is the basic resume writing, once you kind of get the details down, you can be pretty effective at that. And I'm pretty good with my my grammar and spelling and all that fun stuff. So I focus more on kind of just the overall presentation. How do I make it so it looks clean, a little more white space around it so I don't feel like I'm overwhelmed looking at the resume, and then try and get more stuff in the first half of the first page. And that's really where I'm trying to make an impact,
right?
So that when somebody looks it over in that 8 to 20 seconds, they get the gist of it and know who you are without having to figure it out for themselves. And so with a lot of that, I tend to have more conversations about the roles they did and stories around them. So I'm trying to trigger stories in their head that they've long since forgotten about that are actually kind of cool, that will then connect with the reader, whether it's a hiring manager or a recruiter, and get them to stay in the maybe pile versus tossed into the I don't think so pile.
That I've done a little bit of kind of career coaching over the last 20 years or so, and it's interesting because you start out with kind of the pile of everybody, and then you've got to make it to the pile of we're considering you, and then we got to make it to the pile of finalists. It has to have something unique and compelling that causes it to continue on the journey, because they're looking at resumes all the time, and they just tend to, unless it's like you said, if it doesn't catch you in the first few seconds, it probably won't. It's like a video. If you hit a YouTube video, if you're not compelled in the first 10 or 15 seconds, unless you really are wanting the information in the entire thing or whatever. Yeah. But that's good. That's good. Well, so tell me, what was your inspiration? How did you transition from? Touch on your main business. What's your main source of income, and then what had caused the transition to what you're doing as a side business?
Yeah, so I've been in the telecom business 23 years, and I've been a project manager. I've been a program manager, director, and in a variety of roles, gone through lots of bosses, lots of positions, lots of companies in that time. And what I found was it's not something that is super stable, and you're only as good as your last project and your abilities and your network. So
their current need.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I've seen companies that they say, oh, we want you to be here forever, and then they're there 5 years before they go out of business. Yeah. So it's kind of a scary thing. And so through all that, I realized that, number one, I need to be able to promote myself and really take charge of my career. And so that meant really tracking my results, being able to kind of update my resume as I go with that information and really make that happen. And so over time, I realized, hey, I want to have an exit strategy at retirement or before, whether it's a retirement strategy or hey, I'm out of a job, I need to have some income coming in strategy.
Or involuntary early retirement strategy.
Exactly. So with all that, I've been kind of a mini side entrepreneur for a long time. I've started ideas that never went anywhere. Yeah. And I finally said, forget it. Get out printing a business and developing a business name and actually do something with this thing. So I got to a point where I said, all right, this is time. Had some other people say, yeah, just do it. You got a good idea, go with it. So I started with small business consulting, and I took out an ad, and it did nothing. And so through that, I found that I had an opportunity to kind of leverage my LinkedIn resources and then change that up to an offer for resume writing, and actually got some traction there, and then just kind of built it from there.
Good.
As a side business.
So, this platform of my podcast is just designed to allow you to promote and really share what you do. So what are the service you provide? I mean, you want to talk about cost? You want to talk about, I mean, share whatever you would like. If I'm looking at, if I say I want to build my resume or I want to build my LinkedIn profile, and I'm coming to you, what's the
Yeah, whole thing.
Yeah.
So basically, my two primaries are resume writing, which is $197 currently, and LinkedIn profile. If they do it at the same time, it's $97. Otherwise, it's $147. And it's kind of that middle price range. I've seen some that go upwards of $1,000, $2,000 for the combo, and others that are down at $30. And I think the difference is I try to get that information out of their heads and help kind of create their brand. On the business consulting side, I kind of take the similar approach, and I'm working on a client avatar in order to understand who their clients are, convert that into a unique selling proposition to help them really understand what they're selling and to whom, and then tie that together into their website, whether it's their homepage, about page, details on their staff, maybe tie that back into their LinkedIn company page or their individual profiles as a way to kind of have this kind of a consistent brand. And I think with that, it also helps them truly understand where they're going with things. So on the resume side, a lot of times they're like, oh, well, everybody's my ideal company. I want to work for all these guys. I'm just going to send out 200 resumes a week. Well, the reality is very few people actually land a job through shooting out a cold resume online. Most of the people get it through their connections. So if you can be a little more targeted on that, now you're not wasting a bunch of your time doing things that are not going to provide the value and spend more time doing the things that do. And that allows you to be a little more sane and have a lot better results from that. Those are kind of things.
You've worked on kind of the editing and producing side of things, but do you have a sense as an HR person that's looking at resumes all the time? Do you have a sense that sometimes they receive resumes and it's almost like you have literally cut and pasted my company name in a generic letter with a generic resume? And a sense that I can tell you've sent out 200 resumes to 200 companies. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, if it's not tailored at all, or you don't have even like an email that goes with it, and it's just, here's my resume. Like I saw one resume with no intro, not what the position was about, what they were applying for, anything. It was just basically here and an attachment.
Hire me.
Yeah, and not even to hire me. I was like, oh wow, what do you want me to do with this thing? So yeah, you see that. I think the other thing is, really you're trying to make a personal connection of some form. And if you can't make a personal connection and you're just one of 200 resumes, I guarantee they're going to get a resume from somebody on the inside who got a referral.
Yep.
And that person's making the top 5 list, even if the resume generally sucks. So, you really need to be looking at how do you connect with somebody. And a lot of that comes down to how you approach it and taking that approach where you're actually thinking about the company before you submit an application. How can you benefit them? Because otherwise what happens is you may get called back for an interview and you go, what job is this?
That's right. What company are you again?
Who are you?
I don't want to live in Seattle.
Yeah, exactly. Why did you send your resume here? What are you doing to me?
Yeah, that is fun. That's good. That is sage advice. And it's a little bit like I think you alluded to earlier, of almost trying to put yourself in the place of the HR manager that says, what are they looking for? How can you make that connection through a story or through a something that catches their eye and makes a connection, really early and connects you to the job, to their needs, kind of that perfect triangle. So tell me a little bit more about, like, since you started this, has there been a low point? I mean, it's, you have the luxury of having your day job type thing, but has there been a low point that you can look back in the last couple of years since you started this and say, Wow, that was a black day.
It's funny because I thought back to that, and there haven't been a ton of those.
Mm-hmm.
I've had, a few things around that. When I started my blog, I got it at one point. I said, how can I give back into the telecom business? There really wasn't anything talking about the kind of softer side of what we do day in and day out. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, I'll try some blog posts on that subject. And I did one that did really well, and it kind of for my level went really viral compared to my other posts, and that was great until I got a call from the director of HR from my company saying, I need you to stop posting that and take it off the web. I'm like, oh boy, well, now what am I going to do? Yeah. So, and it probably didn't help that I was sharing about what I was doing with this blog, with my HR person who then reported up to the director, and they were a little worried because I was talking about a client type of situation. Yeah. And they were like, all right, we don't want you talking about the client. So I took them all off, anything related to that. And I kind of went more into kind of what the process was about. And I focused more on the resume and career side. And I had some elements around it, but it wasn't client related. Right. It was more around, what are the position types and how do you get them? And some of the things around how recruiting actually happens in the real world so fun, and I just kind of pivoted to that. Mm-hmm. But I realized that I had to adjust to meet both the company needs of my primary day job, which needed to happen, and I needed to be, paid, and couldn't be losing that over something stupid. So, I made some adjustments, closed the loop with the director, and he was fine, and moved on from there.
I think that is great advice to all of us that do a side gig. We really do need to honor that, and I try to do that with my job too. I try to make sure that my side fun project is done outside of hours. It's and there's no real connection between the two that says, I don't want to use resources from that. I don't want to use even connections necessarily from that. If there's any overlap at all. So really respecting that and really making sure that I'm giving that my full attention when I'm there and my full effort, and then on time that is not dedicated to that, then I'm free to do things, and also sharing like you did, sharing with the HR department, sharing with your manager, whoever that is, that says, I am doing this. I want you to be aware I'm doing this, and there's no conflict. Mm-hmm. But I just want you to, so they're not surprised. They don't want to log on to iTunes and say, what is he doing?
Exactly.
That thing. So yeah.
And it's been funny on that front too, because what I found is, especially in this kind of recruiting business, I do a little telecom jobs email each week, mm-hmm. and through that, it also helps me in my day job because I get kind of a first look at people who are interested in looking for that next job. And if I have a position I'm trying to fill, I kind of have a short list, because what I found was I was more of an introvert type person who didn't really connect with people in the social manner. And so this is kind of a way to force myself out of that box and build my network so that when I'm in a role where I have to hire a bunch of people quickly, I have a few different ways I can do that, which isn't just kind of relying on the in-house recruiting team, which ultimately has probably several hundred positions they're trying to fill nationwide for the company and often don't really connect with the role. And so if I can share something through my LinkedIn network or a jobs list or whatever else I have going on, it allows me a way to kind of connect with those people and make those positions happen faster.
Yeah. And that's a profitable overlap, between your side gig and your day job. So you touched on kind of the low point. Tell me your highest high that you've experienced since you started your side gig.
Well, I think right now it's been really fun just because I'm really feeling like I'm getting traction. I'm getting positive feedback from people, when they contact me. But one of the early ones was as I was doing the blog, and I'd done a blog 10 years ago and maybe done 7 or 8 posts, and then I kind of let it lapse. And then I started this thing up 3 years ago, and I just was doing it every week consistently. Mm-hmm. And then I started doing HARO, Help a Reporter Out. And I figured that would be a good way to kind of get some additional visibility. And so I started doing those, and I got good traction, like 1 out of 3 I was able to provide some information that got into a blog post that somebody else was doing as a guest post, generally on a bigger site. And through that, I had a couple that were really cool. And it was fun because I was sharing some of that with the people I was working with, and they were kind of looking over my shoulder and excited about it. So one was talking about cell phones, and it was in Reader's Digest. Wow. So that was kind of cool. And then another one got into exactly, and then another one got into Harvard Business Review, which was fun. And then this other one was a kind of a quirky one. I'd taken up playing guitar in my 40s and figured, just something I can do for life and kind of play with it. And there was an article posting in Haro that was for people picking up guitar later in life. So I replied to that and got it in, and it ended up being an acoustic guitar magazine in the print copy. So I got that in the house, which was pretty cool.
And, on the bottom of your website, it probably says, as seen in Harvard Business Review. Seen on Reader's Digest. There you, and it's legit. It's not fake like on most of them.
It is. And that's the fun thing is you kind of see how things progress. And if you don't really rush them, but you just kind of build on it over time,
right? It's
amazing what can happen when you just are consistent.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you just, one line, two lines, what are one or two kind of pain points or obstacles that you've encountered since you first started that our listeners may even be able to speak into, through feedback? So what would be, say, the biggest obstacle that you think you've encountered since you started the resume service, the LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've really because when I'm trying to do this, I'm generally doing it in the evenings. Every once in a while, I'll do it in my car for 30 minutes at my lunch break, or I'll do it on the weekends before the kids wake up at 4:35 in the morning, so I can get a couple hours in to crank out blog posts and email easy articles and everything else that goes with it. And you keep building one thing on top of the other, and you kind of look back and go, "Oh, I'm running out of time here. What am I going to do next?" And it's kind of funny lately. I've read a lot on virtual assistants and things like that, and thinking, all right, at a certain point, I need to be able to leverage it so that if I want to go bigger and essentially increase my hourly rate or effective hourly rate, how do I go about that? So that's probably my current biggest challenge as I kind of go into this year, because the year started off fast, and I've got a bunch of clients, all the stuff I'm working on right now that are in process, and I'm starting to feel like I might be getting behind on things. So starting to figure out how to balance that's my number one.
So what would be another thing that you think is an obstacle or as a kind of a hurdle that you have to overcome?
Let me see, because I had a note on that one. 1 second. Hard. If you hold on 1 second, I will get this.
I noticed your guitar in the background.
Yes. Kind of showing that I got the acoustic over there and the electric over on the other side. So the other one is kind of around building a list. So building an email list. I've tried different lead magnets that have gotten, lukewarm results. And part of it is I think my message has been somewhat scattered over time, and my lead magnets are not super compelling. I think the best one I've had recently was more around the jobs list, because I sent it to people in my LinkedIn network who are in telecom, who are looking for telecom jobs. So that one has better conversion. And then I've done some other ones. Right now my list is about 150 people, which is better than it was when it started. It was 2 to 10 for the first 6 months.
And I knew, mine's about 20. There. I knew all of them. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So, it takes time to do that, and I'm obviously learning as I go and trying to figure that out. But ultimately, I'd like to get it to where I can build it up so that ultimately I can do more that's passive income driven rather than just my time.
Sure.
And so I think
otherwise those are kind of another job, right?
Another job, but you want to be able to do something where you can leverage it bigger without just burning yourself out.
Yep. Well, let me dive deeper. Just as we're wrapping up our interview today here, just kind of 4 questions that really want us to allow us to get in your head a little bit. And so, tell me, who's one person like online that you really follow closely, that really inspires you?
Yeah, so there was one guy that I followed for the longest time, and I bought all his stuff and really enjoyed it. His name was Jay Abraham, and he was a big business kind of marketing and business growth guy. And
Right.
his biggest thing, what that I kind of got from him, was it's kind of not what's in your industry, but what's outside that actually can make the biggest difference for you. And so I trained with him for a year in joint ventures and just kind of being on phone calls with him and reading all his stuff. And he had tons of information he'd created over the decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was just kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But it really helped me kind of look at things differently, whether it's people in their resumes or businesses and how they can leverage things quickly without really taking a big chunk of their time out of it.
Right.
And I've applied a lot of it to my approach as well. So for instance, with one was who else has your customers as customers? So I would go to people who are recruiters, and if they had a struggle with a resume, they could send it my way. And if I knew of somebody who was looking for something, I could send them their way. So it was just a way to get more leverage from your time than you would with just standard, hey, I'm going to post an ad and hope I get a response.
Sure. Well, he's been extremely successful. He's the word comes to mind is ubiquitous. He's everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
So give me a quote. Give me a life quote that you live by. A lot of the people that are like you and I that have this extra entrepreneurial gear spinning all the time. We like to live by kind of pithy mantras. And
yes.
So what's a quote that you probably have it taped up on your computer somewhere or something?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because this one I had in my email response for 20 years or whatever. And it was one from John Wooden. And I think it said something like, don't let what you can't do interfere with what you can do.
Yeah. I love John Wooden.
Yeah. And for me, it was a big thing because too often I'd get caught up in all the things that, I'd get stressed out about that I couldn't change. And it was really important for me just to focus on what I could and take action on that and move on and live more in the present. And as I found I did that, I stressed out a lot less.
Yeah. That is sage advice. Sage advice. So speaking of advice, tell me what you would tell yourself pre-side business startup. If you could go back a couple of years, year and a half, whenever it was that you really started this kind of side service, what would you tell yourself that would you think would be sage advice for our listeners that they could really latch onto, that you say, okay, I'd love to speak to myself again, go back, turn the clock back.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is start now. You're going to learn a lot, and if you try to make it all perfect before you jump into it, number one, you're probably not going to start, and number two, you're going to find that what you end up doing is significantly different than what you imagined you would be doing.
That is great advice. It's great advice. I've mentioned on earlier podcasts, somebody said something similar to that, around that same idea of Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, didn't he famously say, if you're not embarrassed by your first attempt, you waited too long?
Exactly. I think one of my early blog posts was about dryer lint. So
you got to get it out there. Got to get it out there. Well, Mike, tell me the best way people can find you. If they want to find you online, is there a website? Is there a LinkedIn profile? Facebook profile? Tell me. And these will also be in the show notes. So
you can find me on MikeMcRitchie.com or just search Mike McRitchie in Google and pretty much the whole first page is me.
It's one of those benefits of having a unique last name.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Your name is Mike Smith.
Yeah, exactly. Other than the guy who caught the Mackinac up in Canada and the guy who wrote some book about his friends, those are about the only other two Mike McRitchies in the first page.
I'm surprised you didn't go like McRitchie Rich or something like that. It's kind of your persona. Was there anything else that I haven't asked you about? You just want to just touch on real quick, just to close out, and we'll wrap this up. But just wanted to give you space to share anything else that you had on your mind or heart.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that is kind of my new focal point, and it's both in the resume writing, career coaching world as well as in the business side. And that is particularly for people who are kind of mid-career. You've progressed through various jobs, or maybe you've started a business, and everything is rolling really well. You're excited about things. You got a great life. You got a great home life. Everything's going perfectly. Have something go sideways, whether it's the company goes out of business and you lose your job, or you have health problems, or your family has health problems, and you have to take care of them full time or half time, and it's really distracting from the rest of the work you do. Or you find you get divorced, and now you got to figure out what you do next on your personal life, and everything else is caving in around you. It is rough to have that happen, and that's why I feel like it's really important for people to be thinking about that in advance. What are those things that could cause me to be derailed? And how will I land on my feet if it does happen, and when it does happen?
That's great advice. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And that's really where, for me, kind of the side hustle came in, because I wanted to be more in control of what my options might be, should that come to happen, and just kind of helping people who are having that happen. I had one person the other day who had been at a company for 10, 20 years, and then they let him go kind of out of nowhere. I had another person who had a father who was really sick, and his mom had died, and he was having to take care of him pretty much full time, and had to give up the business he had built over 10 years. So they're real things that do happen, and I hate to see people caught blind and not be able to recover because they weren't prepared at all for it. So that's kind of what I'm focused on.
That is great advice. Great advice for all of us as we wrap up. And my family and I spent 9 years living in England, and the Brits have a saying. They say when things go all pear-shaped. And I thought that's what a great metaphor of life going sideways, as you said. So, well, Mike, we'll wrap up, and folks, it's your turn to speak into this. We've heard the couple of pain points that he's talked about. One, just kind of a recurring theme on our show is balancing time, and I mean, I love the point he made about how do we kind of transition to more of a passive income mindset instead of just creating another job, creating a night job for myself. Working more for hours. Working on the business instead of in the business. And the second thing is just building an email list. What are the effective strategies on building that, and not just in quantity, but actually quality as well. So it's your turn, Rising Tide. It's your turn to speak into this. And once again, Mike, I want to thank you for joining us today, and it's been a pleasure having you. And just we wrap up every episode with the same mantra that we built this community because all boats rise in a rising tide. Mike, thank you.
Thank you.